Hi, my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting Group. We're an independent and technology agnostic digital transformation and ERP consulting firm, and wanted to chat today about why SAP S/4HANA projects fail. Now, I've spent a lot of time writing and doing video blogs about various SAP S/4HANA failures, S/4HANA challenges that our clients are facing, and a lot of that thought leadership ends up talking about things like organizational change management. You've probably seen or heard me talk about organizational change management and how important that is to a transformation. Other things like business process management, good project controls, all those sorts of things. And while those things are true, what some of the facts are that we look at are that we're not looking at the root cause of why those things happen. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today. Is there's a root cause reason why companies tend to not focus enough time on change management, or they tend to skimp over or gloss over the business process reengineering component of things. And that is because the overall S/4HANA ecosystem is rigged to influence customers in a way that's designed to help sell more software and implement that software as quickly as possible, but not necessarily align with the goals and objectives of those individual customers. So bear with me. I'm gonna show a visual here just to give you a sense of what I mean by that. And so as we're talking here, I'm gonna just sketch out a few thoughts here to help visualize this thought. Now over here on the left, you have SAP. This is obviously the software company SAP Direct that we're talking about here. They are the ones that are obviously their job is to sell software and develop software and create that enterprise software that they're well known for. Now, within that SAP ecosystem, there's a lot more to it. It's not just SAP, obviously. You have the big system integrators that are responsible for selling software, pushing as much product as they can to customers. Primarily, though, their revenue comes from, obviously, the services side of things. So their job is to implement the software, the functional and technical aspects of it. And so you've got these big system integrators, many with hundreds of thousands of employees that are, I guess you would say, drinking the SAP Kool-Aid and taking the messaging to the market that SAP is delivering. Now, you also have ASUG, so the SAP user group, and there's other third parties that are out there influencing the market. And while I believe these are technically third-party independent firms, or organizations, I should say, they are still pushing the SAP message to the marketplace. And then you also have industry analysts, and this is where it gets interesting, is because you have industry analysts like Gartner and Forrester and some of the smaller research firms that are also being paid by SAP to influence and deliver certain types of messaging to the market. And so while they come across as independent third parties, really what they're doing in many of these cases is taking SAP sanctioned or SAP funded research and pushing that out to the market to further influence the market and further position SAP the way that they'd like to be positioned. And then the final big component or cog in the wheel of this big machine is the call it the solo consultants. So these are the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people out there that are not necessarily working for one of the big system integrators, but they're out there just consulting to SAP projects. They've probably been in the SAP ecosystem for quite some time. That's where they've built their careers. And they are more often than not out there pushing a lot of the same methodologies and tools and messages that SAP has created. Now, if we look to the other side over here, you've got the customer. This is you. You're implementing SAP. You're trying to figure out how to navigate this whole thing. And you obviously have a lot of different angles coming at you here in the SAP space. So you have the messaging coming from these different groups here. And this is what's influencing customers to do what it is they do. They're trying to implement S/4HANA as quickly as they can. They're being given aggressive timelines and schedules and being asked to, or forced in some cases, to adopt quote unquote best practices because that's the way S/4HANA has been built. And so when we look at what's wrong with this picture is, first of all, the customer is completely outnumbered. You've got these huge organizations that are influencing customers that don't know a lot about SAP or S4HANA. They don't have the level of maturity or sophistication, nor should they. So you've got this big machine that is influencing customers in the marketplace. Now, the influence that's happening here is there's a few different messages that are coming from these big cogs in the machine. You have the SAP first type of mentality, which is basically SAP and S4HANA and Reba SuccessFactors. SAP and its suite of products should be the first choice because that's best for SAP. It's best for the system integrators. So the customers are hearing that SAP should be the first line of defense and that SAP should be the first entry point, if you will, for the entire organization. Similar to that, you also have this whole concept of best practices. And this is a term that, quite frankly, has annoyed me ever since I started as an ERP consultant 20 years ago. I cannot stand this term best practices because it doesn't exist. Best practices are, they don't exist because what best practices really are in the context of how SAP and other software vendors sell it is basically that's how the software is built. Doesn't mean it's best practice, doesn't mean it's best for you or best for your industry, but the big vendors, the system integrators, user groups, industry analysts tout this concept of best practices and make customers feel as though if they don't adopt those best practices, there must be something wrong with them. They don't want to be best in class. They don't want to adopt best practices. They're resistant to change because they're not adopting best practices. But the thing is, best practices don't exist, but yet the ecosystem is forcing customers to adapt these best practices. So that's another concept or message that's coming through from the ecosystem. You also have this 2025 deadline, which is a big deal in the SAP space and it's creating a lot of anxiety for SAP customers. And for those of you that don't know, SAP has announced that customers have until 2025 to get off of ECC or R3 and presumably upgrade to S4HANA by 2025, at which point they'll cut off support for ECC and R3. I highly doubt they're actually going to meet that deadline or stick to that deadline because I think you'll have too many customers that are up in arms, but that's what they've announced and that's their official position at this point. And so you've got the 2025 deadline and that's heavily influencing customers. You also have this whole concept of agile, which is really interesting that SAP's really embraced this whole agile movement and they're trying to build agile into their methodology. And what I see agile as, I think there's a lot of merit to it in some cases, depending on the type of organization you are. But I see agile as a way for SAP to get their foot in the door and for the SIs to get their foot in the door via a small pilot project that basically gets you down that path of going to S4HANA. It's a brilliant marketing move, but not necessarily what customers need. So we see a lot of the big SIs that are pushing this whole digital core concept. So just focus on the digital core. Let's start with financials. Let's start small. We'll be agile. And they're doing agile in the name of let's just get something going. But in reality, the way SAP is so integrated as a product, agile can actually work counter to effective best practices, or what I would consider implementation best practices, because you're focusing myopically on one small part of the implementation versus trying to define an overall roadmap and looking at cross-functional business processes and whatnot. So you have this whole agile concept, and then the other part of this is this whole we'll say get it done fast concept. So what I mean by that is the SIs, SAP, analysts, particularly SAP and the SIs, are pushing this concept of get this implementation done fast. You can implement S4HANA across your organization in 3 years or less. For some reason, 3 years seems to be the magic number that we hear with a lot of our clients. We probably have right now about 5 or 6 clients that are actively going through their S4HANA implementations. We're helping them through that process and trying to figure out how to navigate some of these pressures that they're feeling that I've highlighted here in red, particularly on the aggressive timelines that they're pushing. So these are some of the messages that are coming from the ecosystem. So then back to the customer here. Here you are, the customer. You've got two major layers here. You've got the executive team, and I'm gonna explain why I'm separating them here in a second. And then we'll call this the project team. And these are the people that are the boots on the ground, the internal people that are handling the project. And so what ends up happening oftentimes is this messaging is highly effective with the executive team. So it's amazing to me how when we go into clients, how how convinced the executive teams are from this messaging that they're hearing from SAP, because it sounds good. It's what we all want to hear. We all want to hear that the software has best practices. We're going to be agile. We're going to get this done in 3 years or less. It's what we all want to hear, especially when you're an executive and you're terrified of a project taking too long, or customizing the software. We don't want to have to customize the software, so therefore we're just going to adapt the best practices. So now you've got the executive team convinced. They're not part of this ecosystem necessarily, but the ecosystem has influenced them, which leaves this group here, highlighted in red there. Now this team has to deal with the pressures and the realities that are very much misaligned with that messaging that has been coming through the market. So more specifically, what is it that we want if we're a project team, if we're a company that's implementing this sort of software? Well, what we want, first and foremost, with our SIs and with SAP as a vendor, is we want accountability. So we want oops, sorry about the misspell there. We want the SI to be accountable. We want to have transparency and visibility into what they're doing, but that's not necessarily their business model. Their business model is more, give us the project. We'll bring on our army of consultants. We'll do what we can to ramp up as many consultants as we can in the name of trying to get this done fast. We'll throw more resources at it. So those are some of the dynamics that we see there. We also want a transformation that is tailored for who we are. So, the 3-year out of the box boilerplate proposals that the SIs and SAP seems to be giving a lot of our clients, at least, are not tailored for who the companies are. And so when we're an organization that's been around for 50 or 70 years, and maybe we've been on a legacy system for 30 years or whatever the number is, you've got a certain amount of, I don't want to say necessarily maturity, but a lot of those processes are baked, and the people and the culture is baked. And not to say we can't change it, but it's not going to happen overnight. Certainly not going to happen in the timelines that the ecosystem from SAP is often pushing for. So we've got to tailor the realities of who we are as an organization and build a strategy and a plan that makes the most sense to us. And that's not happening in the ecosystem right now. The ecosystem is forcing their best interest and what they want to see. And when you're a customer and you're outnumbered like this, you don't have any alternative views. Everything you're hearing, everyone you look to is telling you the same thing, which is, we can get it done fast, just use the best practices, don't be resistant to change. And the reality, though, and what a lot of our customers are finding right now as they're in the midst of these S/4HANA transformations, is it's a lot more difficult than they think. And there's a big disconnect between what they're hearing and getting from the SAP ecosystem and what's actually happening in the reality of their transformation. So we need an approach that's tailored for us. And then the other thing is the SIs aren't the one-stop shop or the silver bullet for everything we need for an S/4HANA, but yet they sell themselves that way. And so the other thing we need is to fill the gaps. So how do we do the things that the SI can't or shouldn't be doing for us? So things like organizational change management. Most importantly, probably is just the overall oversight and management of the system integrator. We have one client that has 150 people full-time from their system integrator. And a lot of what we spend our time doing in these cases is rationalizing, do we need 150 people on this project right now? What are these 150 people doing? The meter's running at a very aggressive rate as far as the daily burn rate. We're burning through cash on this project. So let's make sure we're rationalizing that, not just taking at face value the SIs who are telling us this is what we need to get the job done. Right. So we need to fill the gaps, and we need that oversight is the final point I'll mention here. So the oversight of the system integrator and the overall resources on the project. So now the final component I'll throw in here that's a challenge with these sorts of projects is the fact that there's a blind spot in the industry right now because there's not a lot of history here. The S/4HANA hasn't been around that long, especially when you compare it to ECC and R3 that had been around for seemingly forever, and a good history to base future decisions on, and consultants that have been through the process many project life cycles. But what we have now, the reality of what we're seeing now in this ecosystem, is there's a skills gap because not enough people know S/4HANA or familiar with it or experienced with it. You have skills that are also spread thin. So as SAP pushes this 2025 deadline up here, more companies are going to be pushing to S/4HANA upgrades in a pretty compressed time frame, which is going to spread these resources thin. They're already spread thin now, but they're going to continue to be spread more thin over time. We also have a lack of history to base these proposals on. So while the SIs and other consultants are insistent on these aggressive implementation timelines, the reality is most of them haven't done it. They have no data points to back the fact that they think they can do an implementation in X amount of time. So that's something we need to be really wary of and skeptical of. And back to the point of tailoring for us, we need to build a plan that makes sense for us. And maybe it's not getting this done very super quickly. Maybe we need to be more realistic and a more measured pace for this overall transformation. And then the final thing here is that a lot of the breakthrough technology, and I don't want to knock SAP too much because I think S/4HANA has a lot of potential and there's a lot of cool things they're doing with the product. But the reality is, with that cool technology and things like the machine learning and AI and all the cool stuff they're building in the software, along with that comes big change. And that's big change to our company, which means that's going to take us longer to get through it. And, just throwing resources at it and having, 150 instead of 100 full-time system integrator consultants on the project isn't going to allow us to get that done any faster, because the problem is the change itself is what's difficult. So we need to be spending more time on the organizational change, the business process work, that sort of thing. So the idea here is that, first of all, we have to understand that the ecosystem is putting sort of a bias and a pressure on us that isn't realistic or founded in a reality that is aligned with what we as an organization need. So that's the first step, is we just have to recognize that the messaging we're getting from the market is extremely biased. It's self-serving and helping them sell more software and get you to adapt as much software as you can, as quickly as they can get you to accept that technology, because they make more money off it that way. So we have to, the first step is to accept it. It's almost like acceptance is the first step. That's the situation. That's the lay of the land. So what do we do about it? So this is where, we need to make sure that we balance this out a little bit. We need to be looking over here at this side to balance this out, because we're completely outnumbered, as I mentioned here, with the big SIs, the user group, the industry analysts, solo consultants, obviously SAP as a vendor. So we need to figure out, how do we balance this out? And that's obviously a big part of what Third Stage does, is we provide that technology agnostic, independent view, and that objective view of what really makes sense for you. So having a third party agnostic view, I'll just make a note here that you want agnostic view and objectivity. So we need to figure out ways to add this to the equation so that we can make better decisions and have a more realistic view of how this whole project will look for us. And just as importantly, maybe even more importantly, throughout the transformation, managing that so that we have accountability. We've tailored day-to-day decisions for us as an organization, not just taking the boilerplate stuff that's trying to be forced on us from the SIs and the vendor. We want to fill the gaps that the system integrator can't or shouldn't be doing. And it's also, by the way, a good way to hedge, so you don't have all your eggs in one basket. It's very painful to switch out your system integrator, or to try to not downsize, but to try to cut back on SI resources once you've already gotten into it, even regardless of what your contract says. Just organizationally, it's difficult to do. So, making sure you hedge early on is important, and then also making sure we've got oversight of the system integrator and all the resources there. So hopefully this helps. The idea here is just be aware of this bias, look for ways to add more of a technology agnostic view, objectivity, and that's something that Third Stage can help with as you go through your S/4HANA transformation. So two things just to close out. One is, if you'd like more best practices on implementations, and even though I don't like the term best practices as it relates to software best practices, I do believe there are best practices as it relates to implementations itself. I have a link in this video, in the info section of this video. There's a link to our guide to a successful SAP S/4HANA transformation. It's a great document that has a lot of good stuff in there that might be of interest to you. So that's one thing, is to download that. And then secondly, if you'd like to talk more about this, or how you can provide a objective view of your project, feel free to reach out to me. I'll include my contact information in the info section as well. So feel free to reach out and we can set up a time to chat, and I'm happy to be a sounding board for those of you going through this project, and happy to share some of the lessons we're seeing right now as we speak with several of our clients that are going through their S/4HANA transformations right now. So I hope you found this information useful. and look forward to speaking with you soon. Take care.